Aaron Rodgers is among the most polarizing and enigmatic figures in the history of the NFL. He is a player with individual accolades unrivaled by his peers, and at one point in time, viewed by some as the most talented quarterback to play the game. However, at the same time, has seemed to have continually underachieved throughout his career, with a number of disappointing playoff exits, which has left him with a single Super Bowl title, nearly a decade and a half ago. Because of this, it is difficult to determine where Rodgers' legacy will be ranked in comparison to the other great quarterbacks throughout NFL history. Some people love him, and some people hate him. Regardless, Rodgers has been an iconic figure in the league and has had a fascinating journey both on and off the field, while being widely regarded as one of the best to ever do it. In this video, I'll be taking a look back through his time in the league and examining the highs and lows of his storied career, from winning an absurd 4 MVPs and numerous statistical achievements to his underwhelming and disappointing playoff performances throughout the years. Aaron Rodgers grew up in Northern California, where he would remain throughout his college career. First, at Butte Community College, before transferring to the University of Cal Berkeley. While at Cal, Rodgers would make a name for himself during his 2 years there, throwing for 5,469 yards with 43 touchdowns to 13 interceptions. He would finish his career with a record of 17-4, which included a 10-1 season and top 5 ranking in 2004. His success at Cal led many to believe he would be one of, if not the first player taken in the 2005 NFL Draft. So it came as a surprise to many, Rodgers included, when he fell all the way to the Packers at number 24. With Brett Favre firmly entrenched as the Packers' starting quarterback, Rodgers would have to sit behind the Hall of Fame quarterback for the first few years of his career. And as it is well documented, the relationship between Rodgers and Favre was contentious. With Rodgers being drafted to ultimately replace Favre, Favre had no interest in mentoring the young quarterback and helping expedite the transition process. Rodgers would not get the chance to start until the 2008 season after Favre was traded to the Jets. Having spent 3 seasons developing behind Brett Favre before his debut campaign, Rodgers looked like a seasoned veteran during his first season in the starting role, throwing for 4,038 yards with 28 touchdowns and 13 interceptions. Rodgers would earn his first Pro Bowl nod the following season after leading the Packers to an 11-5 record and clinching a playoff spot. Despite losing to the Cardinals in the wildcard round, Rodgers would go off that game, throwing for 423 yards and 5 total touchdowns, which were the most yards and touchdowns of any QB in their first playoff game. That game would give everyone a glimpse of what was to come, as Rodgers was quickly emerging as one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Despite a rocky start to the 2010 season, in which Rodgers had already thrown 9 interceptions by the midway point of the season, Rodgers would rally the Packers and go on to throw 16 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions with a passer rating of 122 in the back half of that year. Green Bay would secure a wildcard spot at 10-6, where they went on to defeat the number 3 seed Eagles 21-16. In the divisional round, Rodgers would put on a display, completing 31 of 36 passes for 366 yards and 4 touchdowns in a 48-21 blowout victory over the number 1 seed Falcons, which was the most points scored in Packers postseason history. Green Bay would then face their division rival Bears in the NFC Championship game, where Green Bay would come away with a hard-fought 21-14 victory over Chicago. The Packers would face the Pittsburgh Steelers in Super Bowl 45, and once again, Rodgers would step up to the plate, completing 24 of 39 passes for 304 yards and 3 touchdowns in a 31-25 win over the Steelers, earning him Super Bowl MVP honors as well as his one and only Super Bowl title. The 2010 season had solidified Rodgers' place in the upper echelon of quarterbacks in the league and had the Packers looking like they were poised to compete for and win multiple Super Bowls with Rodgers under center. Heading into the 2011 season, with expectations sky high for Rodgers and the Packers, he would not disappoint, at least not initially. That year, Rodgers would win the first of his 4 MVPs, and in my opinion, was the best season of his career. That season, he would throw for 4,643 yards on 68.3% completion and a ridiculous 45 touchdowns to just 6 interceptions. Rodgers' 122.5 QBR that season is the highest single-season passer rating in NFL history. Green Bay was absolutely rolling behind their MVP quarterback, clinching the number 1 seed in the conference and finishing the year at an impressive 15-1. Heading into the postseason, all signs pointed to a second consecutive title for the Packers. However, this would be the first of many times where we would see Rodgers come up short in the playoffs after an impressive regular season run. In the 2011 divisional round, the Packers would fall to the New York Giants, becoming the first team to go 15-1 and not win a single playoff game. Rodgers would throw for a lackluster 264 yards with 2 touchdowns and 1 interception. Despite the disappointing end to the 2011 season, the Packers would bounce back in 2012 behind another solid season from Rodgers, who would lead the league in passer rating for the second year in a row and throw for 4,295 yards, 39 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. Green Bay would earn the number 3 seed in the conference that year, finishing the season at 11-5. The Packers would go on to defeat the Vikings in the wildcard round, 24-10, before facing the 49ers in the divisional round, and once again, Rodgers would put up pedestrian numbers, at least compared to his usual regular season numbers, only throwing for 257 yards with 2 touchdowns and an interception before ultimately losing the game 45-31. Although Rodgers' numbers weren't terrible, and you certainly can't put all of the blame on him for that loss, we were starting to see a pattern of Rodgers playing at an elite level during the regular season, and then seeing his play dip when it mattered the most in the playoffs. This narrative has surrounded Rodgers throughout his career, but this is when I believe it started and people began to take notice. Rodgers would miss a good portion of the 2013 season after suffering a broken clavicle in Week 9, and despite losing their next 5 games, Green Bay would manage to stay afloat until Rodgers returned for their season finale against the Bears with the NFC North title on the line. This would be a hallmark Rodgers performance, as he would lead a comeback victory in his first game back, throwing for 318 yards and 2 touchdowns, which included a 48-yard game-winning touchdown on 4th down to win the game and secure the NFC North crown. Although there was excitement surrounding Rodgers' return, they would have to play the 49ers once again, who continued to be an obstacle that the Packers could not seem to overcome. The game would be tight throughout, with the score locked up late in the 4th quarter, but for the 4th consecutive time, the Packers would fall short against the Niners as they eventually lost 23-20 in the wildcard round, adding another early postseason exit to Rodgers' playoff resume. The 2014 season would see Rodgers win his second MVP award, and by this point was being widely considered as the best quarterback in the league, even with the likes of Tom Brady and Peyton Manning still playing. Rodgers was in the prime of his career and had many people believing he might be the most talented quarterback to ever play in the NFL. Despite his lack of recent postseason success, there was no denying his talent. Rodgers would throw for 4,381 yards, 38 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions, while leading Green Bay to a 12-4 record and the number 2 seed in the NFC. Green Bay would take care of business in the divisional round against the Cowboys, winning 26-21, with Rodgers throwing for 316 yards and 3 touchdowns. After that game, it felt as if Rodgers and the Packers were finally ready to change the narrative and make another deep postseason run. Unfortunately for them, things would fall apart for them in spectacular fashion against the Seahawks in the NFC Championship game. With the Packers leading 19-7 with just over 5 minutes remaining, Seattle would come storming back and, thanks to a special teams blunder on an onside kick, allowed the Seahawks to take the lead with 44 seconds left. Rodgers would manage to lead Green Bay down the field to send the game to overtime. However, Seattle would win the coin toss and score on the first possession to end the game. That loss was an absolute gut punch to the Packers, as they had that game in the bag, but squandered it away in the final moments. Although Rodgers won his second MVP, it was hard to view that season as anything other than a failure. From that point on, the criticisms regarding Rodgers in the postseason, fair or not, only continued to grow louder as we continued to witness playoff loss after playoff loss in the years that followed. In 2015, the Packers would be eliminated from the divisional round against Arizona, losing in overtime by a score of 26-20. The following year, in 2016, the Packers would get blown out by the Falcons in the NFC Championship game by a score of 44-21. Then, over the next 2 years, Green Bay would miss the postseason altogether in 2017 and 2018, which would eventually lead to the firing of Mike McCarthy prior to the start of the 2019 season. 2019 would be a reset for the Packers as new head coach Matt LaFleur would take over and things appeared to be heading in the right direction. That season, Green Bay would make it back to the playoffs after going 13-3. The Packers would go on to beat Seattle in the divisional round 28-23, which set up yet another matchup with the 49ers in the NFC Championship game. Despite the reinvigorated Packers team under new head coach Matt LaFleur, it would be the same old story, as San Francisco would knock off Green Bay at home 37-20, which would be Rodgers' third consecutive NFC Championship loss. By this point, Rodgers had become such a polarizing figure, as some people pointed to his incredible stats and immense talent, while others could only focus on his lack of playoff success and Super Bowl titles and viewed him as overrated. Off the field, he was just as polarizing, as many people viewed him as abrasive and difficult to work with. Former teammates had come out and criticized Rodgers publicly for being a bad teammate, while there were also rumors claiming there was tension between him and Matt LaFleur regarding how the offense should be run. Things would really escalate for Rodgers during the pandemic after he refused to get vaccinated, which created a media circus not just within the NFL, but the national media as well, with many people publicly condemning the star quarterback. Despite all the turmoil and public backlash at this time, Rodgers would go on to have one of the best seasons of his career in 2020. He threw for 4,299 yards, 48 touchdowns to 5 interceptions, en route to his third MVP award. The Packers would finish the year at 13-3, clinching the NFC North title, as well as the number 1 seed in the conference. With Rodgers back in MVP form, and now in year 2 of the LaFleur offense, things were lined up perfectly for Green Bay to make a Super Bowl run. After dispatching the Rams in the divisional round by a score of 32-18, Rodgers would be matched up against Tom Brady and the Bucs in Lambeau for the NFC title game. Rodgers would step up for this game, throwing for 346 yards and 3 touchdowns. However, the Packers could not stop the Tampa pass rush, as Rodgers would be sacked 5 times that game before ultimately losing 31-26. Rodgers was now 1-4 in conference championship games and became the first player in NFL history to lose 4 in a row. This was a tough loss for Rodgers, especially to Tom Brady, who was viewed as the ultimate winner, which further fueled the narrative and emphasized the idea that Rodgers couldn't get it done in the playoffs. However, Rodgers would manage to bounce back in 2021 and continued his streak of excellent regular season play, earning a ridiculous 4th MVP award, the second most of all time, behind only Peyton Manning. He threw for 4,115 yards, 37 touchdowns, and only 4 interceptions. This was a major accomplishment in his career, and should have been the highlight of the season. However, the Packers would be matched up against the 49ers yet again in the divisional round, and by that point, I think even Packer fans had to know what was coming. It would be an ugly back-and-forth matchup between the two teams in a game that only generated 23 total points. But for the 4th time in his career, Rodgers and the Packers would once again fall short against the Niners in the playoffs, losing the game 13-10. Although Rodgers wasn't great in this game, only throwing for 225 yards, I think it's fair to put most of the blame on poor special teams play. Regardless, it was another blemish on his legacy, and cast serious doubts on whether he would ever win another ring. On top of this, Rodgers was now in his late 30s and was beginning to contemplate whether he wanted to retire. After an offseason full of speculation regarding retirement or trades to another team, Rodgers would eventually return to Green Bay for the 2022 season, which would ultimately be his final year as a Packer. Although Rodgers returned, there seemed to be an underlying tension between him and the team, with Rodgers' long-term future in question, and the team having recently drafted quarterback Jordan Love in 2020, it appeared that Green Bay was looking towards the future, and a split from Rodgers was inevitable. 2022 would ultimately turn out to be a disappointment for the Packers, as they would struggle throughout the year and only managed to go 8-9, and were eliminated from playoff contention in a Week 18 loss to division rivals Detroit. With Jordan Love's contract up for renewal, and Rodgers about to enter his 40s, the writing was on the wall, and it was clear that both sides needed a change. You had the Packers who were ready to hand over the keys to Love, while Rodgers was looking to either retire or find a fresh start somewhere else. And on April 26, 2023, Rodgers would be traded to the New York Jets, bringing an end to a historic 18-year run with the Packers. Unfortunately for Rodgers, a torn Achilles 4 snaps into his first game with New York would bring his 2023 season to an end. This was a huge disappointment for him and the Jets, who went into that season with Super Bowl aspirations. Rodgers is still in the hunt for that elusive second ring, and only time will tell whether he manages to get it. But when looking back at his career, it seems incomprehensible that he has had such a lack of postseason success. We've seen how excellent he's been throughout his career, while also being a part of many talented teams, which makes it hard to pinpoint why exactly he hasn't had more success. Some will blame it on Rodgers for not playing at the same level he had during the regular season, while others will point to poor defensive and special teams play during critical moments of the playoffs. Regardless, I think it's safe to say he's one of the most talented quarterbacks to ever play the game. Despite how many people feel about him, he has the numbers and MVPs to back it up. On top of that, you have to factor in the longevity. He's been doing this for 20 years now, and has only just recently looked like he might be on the decline. And although things don't look great with the Jets at the moment, if he were to grab another Super Bowl title, he could further cement his legacy as one of the best to ever do it before he retires. That being said, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know your thoughts on Aaron Rodgers down below in the comments. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.